Well, it's 2022 now, and the beer market here in Australia is pretty goddamn uninspiring, to say the least. Just in the last decade, I've observed the international beer selection at major liquor retailers thin out to a horrifying extent. First in favour of pushing ciders, then craft beer, long after they really had their time in the limelight. It's rather depressing to lay eyes on all the rows of these terribly overpriced beers that mostly just gather dust and go out of date. Yes, I know, our god-awful excise tax has a lot to blame for that too. If you've ever read any books published in recent years that showcase all the world-renowned beers out there, you'll quickly notice that by and large they are absent from the shelves here. The challenge of finding them often takes you to online retailers who will have a very small quantities available for a short period of time. Of course, the exorbitant cost of postage turns us into a very expensive exercise. At the end of the day, finding a great, satisfying beer should never be this much of an effort. Anyhow, back to the subject of international beers. Realistically, you could fill a store the size of Dan Murphy's full of beer from around the globe, and it'd only be the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's actually out there. So, when you consider that nowadays it's been reduced to just one lousy aisle, you can see just how shockingly limited that truly is. The real kick in the guts, though, comes when these supposed international beers turn out to be brewed under license in Australia and taste nothing at all like their foreign counterparts, despite having a premium price slapped on them. One of the worst examples of this phenomenon that occurred in the last decade was with Pabst Blue Ribbon. Back in 2012, quite to the amazement of many beer lovers, cases of 16-ounce or 473ml cans turned up on the shelves at Dan Murphy's for a very reasonable price by Australian standards. I recall that whatever quantities they had initially sold tremendously well, and there was a brief time where we had to wait for more supply to make its way here. When it did, there were actually pallets of it in their beer matrix, and they too vanished pretty quick. Distribution, I recall, passed through a few hands here. First Pinnacle, then McLaren Vale Beer Company around 2013, and later By the Bottle in 2017. They also distributed another Pabst brand, Old Milwaukee, which was also competitively priced and received quite well. I happen to know there were also plans to distribute Lone Star. At this point in time, things were certainly looking up for genuine US beer brands being readily available in Australia. Now, something I've learnt in life is that when things start to go really well, it's actually time to worry just a little. Less than a month after I had a round-the-world trip that actually took me on a pilgrimage to the historic Pabst Brewery in Milwaukee, as well as the Miller Brewery, I was utterly gobsmacked to lay eyes on an article in Brews News informing me that Pabst had struck up a deal with Tribe Breweries in Australia to brew PBR under license here. Surely these plans wouldn't come to fruition. Now, some time passed and the 16-ounce cans were still around here in plentiful supply, until one fateful day in 2019 when I saw out of the corner of my eye a 6-pack of what I first thought were 12-ounce cans in the fridge at a BWS. On closer inspection, they were the nightmare I was hoping not to come true, as there were actually 330ml cans sold at the same price point as the 473ml ones, or 16 ounces. I recall messaging my good mate and fellow Aussie beer reviewer Jez regarding this dreadful development, and he advised me that this Aussie brewed Pabst Blue Ribbon actually tasted fucking awful, and it was like it had dirt added. Not long after this, I engaged the CEO of By the Bottle, Roger Simpson, who I'd earlier had contact with when Old Milwaukee came out here to shed some light on the situation. But all he could really tell me was what I already knew, and inferred that the price point was just a little bit ludicrous. Well, 3 years have passed, and that shit is still on the shelves, folks. A while back, I even talked to the beer store, beerstore.com.au in Melbourne, and this was in the hope that they might perhaps consider importing the real McCoy, but they informed me that they had looked into it, and it really wouldn't be cost effective, as the price point would be way too high. Moving on now to the story of Coors or Coors Light in Australia. Now, over the years, I had enjoyed Coors Banquet or Coors Original when it popped up every now and then at the bottle shop here, and knew it to be a really solid, delicious, and quaffable lager. So when I got wind that Coca-Cola Amatil here in Australia were re-entering the beer market and had struck up a deal with Molson Coors to distribute their vast portfolios of beers, I was pretty goddamn excited, to say the least. At last, I could enjoy Coors Banquet, Molson Ice, Carling, and many of the other brews, that they offered on a regular basis as a result. Well, the day finally rolled around in December of 2013 when these Molson Coors beers hit the shelves here. Much to my surprise, it was simply just Coors Light, or Coors, as they called it. Coors Light rebranded as simply Coors because by Australian standards, light beers are very low in alcohol by definition, not just simply low in calories like in the US. The other offering was Blue Moon Belgian White. I believe both were actually brewed in Canada, the home of Molson. Anyway, the first batch of Coors Light was terrific. Crisp, clean, refreshing, with a slight note of banana, a perfect beer for the oppressive heat of Queensland in the summer months. I think that by the time I had finished my first case of Blue Moon, I already had 4 cases of Coors. In time we saw Molson Canadian and Carling, the British variant, turn up on our shelves too. Then something awful happened. They started brewing and bottling Coors here, and the results were just awful. A totally bland, tasteless soda water-like concoction that in no way resembled the stellar brew we first got to taste. And yeah, it was in a 330ml bottle for the same goddamn price. Oddly, the cans that were 355ml were also for sale here still, but and they were made in the US. Somehow, in time though, they also became quite inferior to what first turned up here on our shores. Oh, and guess what? Over time, they also brewed Blue Moon here too. The results were pretty lackluster, to say the least. When I recently read that Coca-Cola Amatil, now Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, had announced that it will be withdrawing from the Australian beer market, thus ending 8 years of official distribution of Molson Coors beers down here, I was sort of relieved in a way, as all they had done, I guess, was make a giant mess of it and missed a golden opportunity to introduce some stellar brews to this dull market. I've recently tried in vain to get some answers regarding the future of their brands, particularly Coors, but I suppose only time will tell with this. If someone does happen to pick up the contract, I would certainly hope that they start importing product from the US again, and this time, Coors Banquet. For me, Budweiser was always one of those ultra-reliable staple beers that you could fall back on here. The taste was very distinctive, thanks to the Beechwood aging, and it was sure to hit the spot no matter what the season. Despite being 4.9% ABV in Australia, 5% in the US, it really made no difference to the taste and was still brewed and bottled in the USA. I suspect the ABV listed was just for the sake of labelling and taxes, to be perfectly honest. When AB InBev acquired Carlton United Breweries from SAB Miller in 2016, things were looking quite promising. But once again, this was a case of misplaced confidence, as not too long after this, they started brewing Budweiser locally with an ABV of 4.5%, and the results were absolutely terrible. It was yet another case of a well-received US import being destroyed by local production. Even when Carlton United was later sold off to Asahi, the situation with Budweiser didn't change at all. They appear to be continuing the local production and distribution until another entity picks it up. Miller Genuine Draft, which is actually the same brew as Miller High Life, although the latter is pasteurized and Miller Genuine Draft is just cold filtered, is a staple from the US that I had enjoyed immensely since the early 90s. It was easily accessible and reasonably priced here. Unfortunately, its popularity inevitably led to local production here too. So that case of 355ml bottles suddenly became a case of 330ml bottles, where technically you lost 600ml of beer, but paid the same price. Of all the US macro beers brewed here under contract, this one would have to probably be the best, although I would still much prefer the imported version from the States. In conclusion, one must ask, what the hell are we doing putting up with this bullshit? Are people really this complacent? So much for being a consumer-based society and giving the people what they want. Oh, and yeah, I'm well aware that this doesn't end with US beers either.